Five Below means hot stuff, cool prices, and the best kind of fun anywhere. The trends you see all over your feed can be yours for way less than the rest. Like can't keep in stock candy and snacks, brand name beauty, the latest tech, room decor, and lots more. Plus, get extreme value finds you just have to see to believe in our 5 Beyond shop. Yep, you could say we're kind of a big deal here. Shop over 1,600 stores nationwide and fivebelow.com.
Earlier this month, the Supreme Court seemed to make a big decision about abortion. The abortion pill, to be exact.
Breaking news out of the Supreme Court, big implications for reproductive rights. The justices unanimously...
A group of doctors were the plaintiffs here. They argued that Mifepristone, the abortion pill, was unsafe. They were asking the court to make the drug a lot harder to get, taking away the option of ordering it online or by phone.
The implications are enormous. Medications are now the most common way to end a pregnancy, and some providers...
The Supreme Court said no way. Conservatives and liberals actually joined forces to issue a 9-0 decision.
The unanimous decision was the court's first ruling on an abortion-related case since the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. So let's bring in Dr.
It's possible you heard about this ruling and thought, that's a big loss for the anti-abortion folks here. But if that's the case, you have not met Dr. Christina Francis. I feel like I should say this at the top. Dr. Francis, you and I are probably going to disagree in this conversation.
Sure, no problem.
Dr. Francis is an OB-GYN who's delivered thousands of babies. She's also the president of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists.
I actually enjoy having conversations with people that have disagreements with me on this issue in particular. And so I always value the opportunity to have good conversations about this. So thank you for being honest about that.
Dr. Francis is one of a handful of OBs who submitted testimony to the court about Mifepristone. She claimed the drug made her job harder, made it more likely she might someday have to do a surgical abortion to clean up a failed medical abortion. The justices said her argument didn't fly, that Dr. Francis didn't have standing to sue here. After all, she could always simply refuse to do an abortion. Given the loss you just had at the Supreme Court, was being part of this Mifepristone case worth it?
100% it was worth it. Maybe I am the eternal optimist, but I don't view it as having lost in particular. The Supreme Court didn't actually rule on the merits of our case. So in the ruling that they made, they didn't say that Mifepristone is safe for women. They simply said that we weren't the right plaintiffs to bring this in front of the court.
Today on the show, as the Supreme Court wraps up its term, we're talking to the people at the heart of its biggest cases. Dr. Christina Francis is going to explain why the fight over abortion pills and abortion generally is far from over. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Before she became the top executive of one of the most powerful anti-abortion advocacy organizations in the country, Dr. Christina Francis worked in a rural hospital in Kenya. She told me she was their first OB-GYN in over 20 years. In the first couple of years after her residency, she delivered 1,500 babies. She felt like she could stay in Africa forever. But then, on a visit home, an old friend called her up. This friend told Dr. Francis she was not doing enough to fight against abortion. So, Dr. Francis moved home. A few years later, she found herself in D.C. at the annual March for Life, and she says it was a turning point for her.
I went to the March for Life and went to the Holocaust Museum. I'd never been there before. And I was walking through, and for anyone who's been there, they know it's, very powerful and very impactful and just makes you think about a lot of things. And one of the rooms in the museum has stories about basically the lack of response from the United States in response to what was going on and, with the extermination of Jews and with several stories, and just sort of sat in the room reading the stories. And I just remember feeling myself getting very indignant and thinking, how on earth could people know that this many innocent people were being killed and not say anything or not do anything about it?
Oh, gosh, as I gotta say, as someone who is raising children in the Jewish tradition, I know there are people who would be really offended by that comparison because abortion care, there have actually been lawsuits over this by Jewish people who say that abortion care is deeply important to them. It's a violation of their religious rights for it to be taken away. So I think I need to say that out loud, that
Sure.
that comparison would offend people or might offend people.
Sure. No, and I deeply appreciate you raising that and would say that in no way was I meaning to be offensive to anyone. Again, that was just how things struck me because of my heart breaking over what had happened and realizing that for me personally, this was an issue of injustice that I also needed to stand up for. And so, yes, in no way was that meant to be offensive to anyone. And I certainly understand that everyone's experience is going to be very different. So, yeah.
You're now the CEO of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And you have this one story you tell about a patient of yours that I think really, to me, explains your point of view well. And I'm wondering if you can tell that story just briefly now. This is a woman you were seeing, a pregnant mother who was given a number of grave diagnoses, like her fetus had Down syndrome, also a birth defect known as cystic hygroma. Mm-hmm. And there was an abnormal buildup of fluid. What might a doctor who's not Christina Francis have recommended in this situation? Like, what was this patient being told about what was happening with her?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just give a little bit more background on the patient, just so that maybe if there's another physician listening, they would be able to put themselves in my shoes here. But this was a patient. I was actually seeing her for the very first time. Her previous physician had left our group, and so she'd never met me before. And the first time I'm meeting her is during her first trimester ultrasound, towards the end of her first trimester, when some of these abnormalities were detected, the cystic hygroma in particular. And so not, the best way to have to meet a new patient to, deliver that news. And certainly when we see it that early in the pregnancy, it has a poor prognosis typically. And so we talked about, what that might mean, that it could mean an increased risk of some sort of genetic abnormality. It could mean an increased risk of her losing her baby at some point during the pregnancy.
I think you said a high-risk specialist said the child had less than a 5% chance of surviving the pregnancy.
Yeah, correct. So she went to see our high-risk specialist. They did genetic testing, found that her baby had Down syndrome. And then when she got a little farther along in the pregnancy, we discovered a complex heart defect. And then the baby actually started to develop something called hydrops fetalis. And then at that point is when the high-risk specialist said, that the baby had less than a 5% chance of survival of the pregnancy, and recommended to her that many patients would choose termination of pregnancy in this scenario because of the very minimal chance of survival of her baby of the pregnancy.
Did she not want that?
She didn't. No. So she and she told me that the high-risk specialist was, very kind about it. He wasn't forcing her to do it, which is not the experience of other patients that I've talked to. But she told him that for her, that was not the right choice. And so we continued through her pregnancy, but not saying, unfortunately, in this kind of a situation where a patient receives an adverse diagnosis, oftentimes what they're offered is, well, either you can have termination of pregnancy or there's nothing we can really do for you. And, to me personally, that sounds like not really a choice, right? So I continued to walk with my patient through the rest of her pregnancy and just kind of waiting for, to see what would happen, but caring for her as I would any other pregnant woman and any other pregnancy. And one day she came in and she showed me this blanket that she had knit, preparing to lose her daughter and preparing to bury her. But she'd had an ultrasound done that day as well. And the sonographer came into my office after doing that ultrasound, and she just kind of had this shocked look on her face. And I was expecting her to tell me that my patient's child had passed away. And she said, no, the fluid is gone completely. And I said, what do you mean? And she showed me the pictures. And in fact, the high drops had completely resolved. And Grace, is her name, looked completely normal.
It sounds like a miracle.
Well, exactly. That's, the sonographer asked me, what's the medical explanation for this? And I said, well, I don't know that there is a medical explanation for this, but certainly this is a sign of improvement. And so she went back to the high-risk doctor and she continued her pregnancy. And at 34 weeks, I had the immense honor and privilege of delivering Grace. And I can say her name, her mom has given me permission, of delivering Grace. And she came out screaming, defying all odds. And she's now my goddaughter, and she's 10 years old. And the light of her family's life. She does have Down syndrome. She's had a few surgeries to correct her heart defect, but she's doing amazing.
The thing that stands out to me about this story is that I think it gets to something we agree on, which is there are things we don't know. There are things we can't know. And we make the best choices with the knowledge we have at the time. But I think that your approach would be different than mine to that. I'm sort of wondering, given what happened here and how profound it was for you, clearly, what are your hard and fast rules when you're dealing with a pregnant person in a delicate situation? If a woman comes to you with an ectopic pregnancy, are you willing to offer her treatment that would resolve that ectopic pregnancy?
Oh, 100%. So my goal always when I'm sitting with a patient is to fulfill the oath that I took as a physician, which is to promote the health of my patients and to never intentionally allow or cause harm to my patient.
So you would be willing to do, I guess I would call it an abortion. You might call it something different, though.
So ectopic pregnancies have actually never been considered abortions. Even in medical terminology, they're not referred to as abortions.
So if a woman came to you...
The vast majority of the time, actually about 90 to 95% of the time, the embryo has actually already passed away by the time we diagnose an ectopic pregnancy. And so certainly there would be no ethical dilemma there when the embryo has already passed away. But even beyond that, I have treated women with ectopic pregnancies where the baby had a heartbeat. And, if medical technology advances to the point that at some point we can reimplant those embryos, then absolutely that's what I would do, because that would be advocating for both of my patients.
Can we talk about when it gets more complicated? Like a woman coming to you in her first or second trimester, her water's broken, or her fetus has what is likely a fatal abnormality. My understanding is that you do not think abortion is appropriate care in those circumstances. And actually, you and your colleagues have advocated for making a way to deliver the fetus, even if it's quite early, like 20 weeks, something like that, rather than doing an abortion, doing a C-section, doing having the woman labor. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I don't think it's a completely accurate representation of our position. But I think, again, it goes back to definitions are extremely important. So the word abortion can be very vague and mean different things. When we're talking about induced abortion, the intentional ending of the life of the fetal human being, that is not necessary in the situations that you described, with pre-viable rupture of membranes or, where a woman has an infection in her uterus or some other potentially life-threatening condition of pregnancy. It is not necessary to intentionally end the life of the fetus.
But I do wonder about the ethics of asking a woman to go through a process like that if she doesn't want to. I think if a woman wants to do that, that's, of course, a completely separate thing. I'm sure that you would say that the approach is ethical because it preserves the possibility of your fetal patient surviving.
Well, that is part of it. But I wonder
about the adult female patient.
Exactly. Well, and this is part of informed consent. So I have never forced a woman to labor against her will. I've never forced a woman to have a C-section against her will. If a patient of mine decided that she wanted a D&E in that situation,
an abortion.
If she wanted an abortion, right, and that a procedure that would intentionally end the life of her child, I personally wouldn't do it, but that would be her choice to make in that situation. So I want to clarify that I would never force a woman to go through labor and delivery who had not consented to that.
But I think here's what I'd say, which is you're not only a physician, you're also an advocate, and a pretty serious advocate who goes to Congress and explains and uses your lived experience, which is real, to tell legislators what to do. So while you're saying, I've never forced a woman to, labor when she doesn't want to, the effect of your testimony in a place like Congress to the Supreme Court might be for a legislator to make a rule that does make it necessary for a woman to labor when she would prefer an abortion, when that would be less traumatic for her. I mean, doctors in Idaho are saying they are having to helicopter women to other states to get them the care that they need. Women in Texas are saying hospitals won't treat my ectopic pregnancies. There are people who are saying the lived effect of the laws, even if the intent is not for them to prevent abortions when they're medically necessary, the lived effect is that it's causing extreme situations for women and their physicians.
I hear you. And I my heart breaks at these stories, actually, because unfortunately, our patients are getting caught in the crosshairs of misinformation being spread about what these laws allow for and what they don't allow for.
But who's the source of that misinformation? It sounds like the hospitals and the lawyers at the hospitals are making decisions that are reasonable because the laws are confusing and could hold them responsible.
So in my reading of the laws, they actually are very clear. I think the problem is that many physicians are not used to reading laws. They're used to their state medical boards or their state hospital associations or their hospital attorneys giving them appropriate explanations of the law. And unfortunately, that is not happening. So even in states, many state laws actually specifically say in the law that this law does not apply in the situation of an ectopic pregnancy. That happened here in my own state. So after our law was passed in Indiana, our hospital association, and I was fully aware of what the law said, but our state hospital association issued guidance that we were going to have to file termination of pregnancy reports in the case of ectopic pregnancies. I knew that this was not the case because I knew that our law actually specifically says this law does not apply in the case of ectopic pregnancy. But I only knew that because I had testified at our state house about this bill. There are ways. So, the American College of OB-GYNs, they could be providing guidance and saying, even if we don't agree with this state law, here's the care that you can provide. Here's what you cannot do under this law. And yet they have been completely silent and, in fact, supporting the chaos and the confusion that has been going on. And so
you're alleging that they like this confusion because it helps their cause?
Well, they've been, I don't know what their motivation is. I'm not sure why they aren't out there providing guidance, because they very certainly could if they wanted to ensure that women were being able to receive the life-saving care that they needed in a timely fashion.
We'll be back after a quick break. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. You are listening while you're driving, cleaning, exercising, maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's really easy, and you could save money by doing it right now from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year. So you're protected, no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
A funny thing happened since Roe v. Wade was overturned. The number of abortions in the United States has soared. Like the Gunther Institute says, there's been an 11% increase in abortions since 2020. And this is interesting to me, and I wanted to ask you about it, because a writer on our website, slate.com, basically made the argument that your Supreme Court case played a critical role in raising awareness about abortion pills, essentially making them more popular. What do you make of that?
Well, I certainly don't think that the opportunity that we've had to discuss not only the inherent dangers related to the abortion pill, but also the unsafe way that they're being dispensed. I don't think that was a boom to the abortion industry. We saw that the percentage of abortions being done via these drugs was already increasing well before our case. And the data that we have now is just a continuation of that increase. And part of that is because they're more profitable for the abortion industry. They don't have to have a brick and mortar facility. They don't have to have, surgical capabilities to be able to do surgical abortions. And because I think of the perceived, there's a privacy issue there that maybe that women can do this in a little bit more private way, and because they've been sold the lie that these drugs are safer than Tylenol.
Many physicians would disagree with you and say that this is safe. This is incredibly safe care, and it's used routinely for women who are having miscarriages to treat their miscarriage as well. And so taking these kinds of drugs off the market could be really bad for women.
Well, so the issue of using Mifepristone for miscarriage was never under challenge in the courts. And also, I will say that the FDA's own data actually says that these drugs are not as safe as over-the-counter medication. So their own data says that 1 in 25 women will end up in the emergency room after taking these drugs because of complications, which is consistent with actually how we know the drug works. One of the impacts of the drug is to actually increase the risk of bleeding from the uterus because of the impact that has on the arteries of the uterus.
I'm sure that those stories exist, but I just don't know that they represent the totality of the experience with these drugs. I think that most of the research shows that this kind of abortion is safe and that women prefer it. And I do kind of wonder where your movement goes now, like in the decision that happened this month. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote that while you and other physicians don't have standing to sue here, it's not clear that no one else would have standing to challenge the FDA's regulation of Mifepristone. What does that mean to you? Who do you think does have standing? And do you think those people are about to move forward?
Well, so I'm not a legal expert. I would have told you I thought we had standing. So I am encouraged that the 3 states that joined our case at the lower court, it sounds like they are still going to continue to pursue this lawsuit, which I think is really important, because I think it's important for women to know that they are receiving substandard care because of the FDA's actions in removing these safeguards, especially in removing that in-person dispensing requirement, but also in removing follow-up visits. Women deserve to have ongoing care.
But if women deserve care, then they need to be able to go to their physicians, and they need to not be feeling like, I can't go to my physician because in my state, I can't get this. Maybe someone could prosecute me because I even asked about an abortion. If your endpoint is good care for women, they need to trust their doctors. And I really do think the laws that have banned abortion have gotten in the way of that trust.
I agree that women deserve to have ongoing care from a physician, and from a physician that they know and trust. The fact is that most abortion providers are not providing ongoing care to their patients because many of them don't care for their own complications and don't take care of their patients.
You could also argue that it's because abortion has been siloed off in this country and made into something shameful that has to be done at clinics and separate. And so, yes, you don't have continuing care because finding an abortion doctor is hard, and they're made to be separate from your actual doctor when this is simple health care.
Well, I think I'll just close by saying, if abortion providers really cared about the outcomes of their patients, they would make the commitment to take care of their patients, not only from the time that they give them the abortion, but beyond, and manage any of those complications.
During oral arguments, the conservative justices seem to lay out a potential legal argument for a new plaintiff to use, which is looking at the Comstock Act, which outlaws the mailing of any drug or medicine or article, whatever, for causing unlawful abortion. Are you and your colleagues thinking about the Comstock Act and how it might fit into a strategy moving forward?
Well, again, I think from a legal strategy or policy strategy standpoint, we're not a policy organization. We're a healthcare organization. I do think that it's dangerous to have high-risk drugs sent through the mail without medical supervision or oversight or any appropriate screening for patients. So certainly we would advocate for any policies that would improve the healthcare and protection of our patients and ensure that if high-risk drugs are going to be distributed, then they be done in a way that has appropriate medical oversight.
That sounds like a maybe. Some historians have argued that the Comstock Act and the man behind it, Anthony Comstock, were so divisive in this country that they basically triggered the movement that led to Roe v. Wade. I wonder if you worry about a backlash in doing what you're doing. The evidence is that something like 60% of all Americans say abortion should be legal. Is it possible that Americans just don't want the same thing that you do?
Well, I think, there are definitely many, many different opinions on abortion in this country. And I think, the statistic that you just quoted shows that we have a lot of work to do in helping educate people, helping them understand what induced abortion is, what it does, the impact that it has on women, that it has had for the last 50 years, and on our society as a whole. So I think we do have a lot of education to do. I think it's also important to remember that while right now a majority of Americans may say that they support abortion at some point in pregnancy being legal, when you carry that out and ask them about abortions in the second trimester and the third trimester, when you ask them about abortions after we know that fetal human beings can feel pain, many of them are opposed to them. And so again, I think Roe had to be overturned in order for us to be able to have good, robust discussions like this in this country, and allow this discussion to actually catch up with medical science and where medical science is now.
I spoke to an abortion advocate who was very religious at some point, who basically said, I'm able to prioritize the life of my adult female patient and her needs, and that's how I do what I do. Why is that not a choice you're able to make?
So, I think that's a false characterization of my position that I'm not prioritizing my maternal patient. And in these very difficult situations with patients who are facing these really difficult diagnoses, My job is to walk with them through that. Absolutely agree. But, if a mom chooses to continue, if she continues her pregnancy to its natural conclusion, that doesn't mean that I'm prioritizing my fetal patient over my maternal patient. That means that just as I do in any situation, I'm taking into account the entire clinical picture and recommending what I feel is best based on my medical expertise and based on the medical evidence.
Dr. Francis, thanks for coming on the show and talking with me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Dr. Christina Francis is the CEO of the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. This episode is part of our Supreme Court coverage for the month of June. You know who else has amazing Supreme Court coverage? Our sister podcast, Amicus. So once you're caught up over here with What Next, click on over to hear Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern's legal analysis of the cases at the heart of the Supreme Court. You can find Amicus, that's AMICUS, wherever you listen. All right, that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.